Sarah Chun had just finished organizing construction paper angels with her third-grade Sunday school class when the black SUVs pulled into the church parking lot. Through the classroom window, she watched 4 men in tactical gear step out, their movements too precise, too coordinated for ordinary visitors. Her hand instinctively moved to her purse, fingers finding the concealed Glock 19 she'd carried for 2 decades of teaching. The children continued gluing cotton balls to their angel wings, completely unaware that their soft-spoken teacher was calculating exit routes and threat assessments with the cold efficiency of someone who once earned the Cody name, the Silent Death, in classified operations across 3 continents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's gentle chime filled Sarah Chun's modest apartment. At 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was set to ring. She had always awakened early, a habit carved deep during years when dawn meant survival and hesitation meant death. Now 22 years after her last classified mission, that internal clock served a gentler purpose, preparing lessons for the children who would gather in her Sunday school classroom in just a few hours. Sarah slipped from beneath her quilted comforter, feet finding the hardwood floor with practiced silence. Even in retirement, even in the safety of her small apartment above Millbrook's downtown bakery, she moved like smoke. Her neighbors never heard footsteps from upstairs. The couple below often joked that they'd forgotten someone lived above them at all. She padded to the kitchen, her movements economical and purposeful. Coffee beans ground with a soft whir, the aroma filling the space that had become her sanctuary. While the coffee brewed, Sarah stood at her window, studying the empty street below with eyes that had once tracked targets across war zones. The habit died hard. Even here, in the safest corner of rural Montana she knew, vigilance remained her companion. Millbrook stretched out before her in the morning stillness. Population 3,847. According to the welcome sign that greeted visitors at the town's single traffic light. Main Street ran straight as a rifle barrel from the grain elevator on the east end to the old Methodist church on the west, where Sarah would spend her morning teaching 7-year-olds about kindness and forgiveness. The irony wasn't lost on. Her steam rose from her coffee mug as she settled at her small dining table, surrounded by the tools of her current trade. Construction paper cut into neat squares, safety scissors with rounded tips, glue sticks that wouldn't harm curious fingers, crayons organized by color in a wooden box her father had made 40 years ago, back when Sarah thought she might become an elementary school teacher instead of a ghost who eliminated threats to national security. She opened her lesson plan notebook, pages filled with careful handwriting that detailed the morning's activities. Today's theme centered on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a story about helping strangers, about seeing past differences to find common humanity. Sarah's pen moved across the paper, adding notes about discussion questions, craft projects, and ways to make ancient wisdom relevant to modern children. The lesson felt particularly meaningful this morning, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the dream that had visited her sleep, fragments of memories from operations she'd officially never conducted in countries that didn't appear in any government records. Dreams where she'd been judge, jury, and executioner for people whose crimes would never see courtroom justice. Sarah shook her head, dispersing the shadows. That life belonged to someone else now, someone whose existence was buried in files so classified they might as well have been fiction. The woman who sat in this kitchen, planning activities for children, bore no resemblance to the operative who had once earned a reputation, whispered in intelligence circles. Across 4 continents, she turned her attention back to the lesson plan. 7 children would arrive at 9 a.m. sharp, their faces bright with the kind of trust that came naturally to the young. Timothy Rodriguez, whose father worked at the grain elevator. Emma Walsh, whose mother ran the town's only restaurant. Little Jacob Thompson, who still struggled with his words, but whose eyes lit up whenever Sarah read stories aloud. These children knew her as Miss Chun, the woman who had taught Sunday school at Millbrook Methodist for 20 years. They knew she made the best chocolate chip cookies in 3 counties, that she remembered every birthday, and that she never raised her voice even when Bobby Martinez tested every boundary he could find. They saw her as gentle, patient, devoted to their spiritual and emotional growth. They had no idea that their soft-spoken teacher could field strip an assault rifle blindfolded, that she spoke 7 languages fluently and could blend into any culture so completely that trained intelligence operatives couldn't pick her out of a crowd. They didn't know that the hands which helped them glue cotton balls onto construction paper angels had once ended 13 lives with surgical precision, each death preventing catastrophes that would have claimed thousands of innocents. Sarah's coffee had grown cold while she worked. She rose to refill her mug, pausing at the kitchen window again. The sun climbed higher now, painting Millbrook's quiet streets in shades of gold and amber. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house across the street, retrieving her newspaper in her faded blue robe. Mr. Kim unlocked the front door of his hardware store, flipping the sign from closed to open. The rhythm of small-town life unfolded exactly as it had every morning for 2 decades. Sarah found comfort in the predictability, in the gentle certainty that nothing more dangerous than a scraped knee or hurt feelings would disturb the peace she'd chosen. This was the life she'd built deliberately, brick by brick, after walking away from a world where violence was currency and death was diplomacy. She returned to her lesson plan, adding a note about bringing extra tissues for craft time. Emma always got emotional during stories about helping others, her tender heart absorbing every lesson about compassion and service. These children would grow up to be teachers, farmers, store owners, maybe even pastors themselves. They would marry their high school sweethearts, raise families in the same houses where they'd been born, and never venture far from the safety of Millbrook's borders. Sarah envied them that innocence even as she devoted herself to protecting it. Her sacrifice had been simple: surrender the adrenaline-soaked existence of a professional killer in exchange for the quiet fulfillment of shaping young minds toward goodness. Some might call it penance. Sarah called it purpose. The morning routine continued with the same precision that had once marked her operational preparation. Shower at exactly 6:15, water temperature calibrated to wake her fully without shocking her system. Hair brushed and pinned in the simple style that had become her trademark, practical and unassuming. Makeup applied with careful restraint, enough to look healthy and approachable, never enough to draw attention. Her wardrobe reflected the same calculated normalcy. Today she chose a knee-length navy dress with small white flowers, modest and appropriate for church. Comfortable flats that would let her kneel on the floor with the children without concern for her knees or dignity. A cardigan sweater that could hide the slight bulge of the concealed pistol she still carried, a precaution that felt ridiculous in Millbrook but which remained as automatic as breathing. The weapon had become part of her morning routine, checked and secured with the same attention she gave to her car keys and lesson plans. 20 years of peace hadn't erased the fundamental truth drilled into her consciousness during training. The world contained people who would harm innocents without hesitation, and being prepared was the only barrier between evil and the defenseless. Sarah gathered her supplies into the canvas tote bag that served as her mobile classroom. Crayons, construction paper, glue sticks, and safety scissors nestled alongside her worn Bible, its pages marked with decades of study and preparation. She'd read that book cover to cover 17 times since moving to Millbrook, searching for wisdom that could bridge the gap between who she'd been and who she was becoming. The walk to Millbrook Methodist took exactly 12 minutes, a route she'd traveled so many thousands of times that her feet knew every crack in the sidewalk. She passed the Kowalski house, where Mrs. Kowalski waved from her garden where she tended roses that had won blue ribbons at the county fair 3 years running. She nodded to Mr. Hanson, who swept the front steps of his barbershop with the same methodical attention he brought to cutting hair. These people had become her neighbors, her community, her chosen family. They knew nothing of her past except the carefully constructed story she'd given them. Sarah Chun, former nursing student who'd changed her mind about medicine and dedicated herself to children's education instead. It wasn't entirely false. She had studied nursing during the months of medical training that made her more effective at keeping targets alive for interrogation. The church building rose before her, white, wooden siding gleaming in the morning sun, its modest steeple pointing toward a sky painted in soft pastels. Millbrook Methodist had stood on this corner for 86 years, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical with the quiet endurance that marked everything in this town. Sarah climbed the front steps, fishing her keys from her purse. As head of the children's ministry, she'd earned the privilege of arriving early, setting up classrooms, and ensuring everything was ready before families began arriving. She unlocked the heavy oak door, stepped inside, and breathed in the familiar scent of old wood, lemon oil, and the lingering traces of last Sunday's coffee hour. The children's wing occupied the church's eastern side, 4 small classrooms that buzzed with energy every Sunday morning. Sarah's domain was room 3, painted in cheerful yellow with Bible verses stenciled along the walls in careful script. She'd painted those verses herself, spending a weekend transforming the space into something that felt both sacred and welcoming. She flipped on the lights and surveyed her classroom kingdom. 8 small chairs arranged in a semicircle around her larger chair, where she would sit cross-legged to bring herself down to their level. A bookshelf filled with Bible stories adapted for young readers, their colorful covers promising adventures and lessons in equal measure. A bulletin board where she displayed the children's artwork, each crayon masterpiece treated with the reverence due fine art. Sarah began her setup routine, spreading materials across the low table where the children would work. Today's craft involved creating Good Samaritan scene dioramas using shoeboxes, construction paper figures, and cotton batting for clouds. The project would take most of their class time, leaving just enough moments for the story and discussion. As she cut construction paper into human shapes, Sarah's mind wandered to the children themselves. Timothy Rodriguez, 8 years old, whose questions about God could stump seminary professors. Emma Walsh, who cried every time Sarah read about Jesus helping people, her empathy so pure it made Sarah's chest ache. Jacob Townsend, barely 7, who struggled with words but whose hugs contained enough love to power the entire church. These children trusted her completely, without reservation or suspicion. They believed she was exactly what she appeared to be, a kind woman who loved them, who wanted to help them grow into good people, who would never let harm come near them. That trust was both a gift and a responsibility, as heavy as any mission she'd ever carried. Sarah had spent 20 years earning that trust, building it one Sunday morning at a time. She'd attended every school play, every little league game, every piano recital. She'd comforted scraped knees and broken hearts with equal tenderness. She'd watched kindergartners grow into high schoolers, guided them through questions about faith and life and the sometimes confusing gap between the two. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The transformation had been gradual, so slow she'd barely noticed it herself. The woman, who once moved through shadows, eliminating threats with surgical precision, had evolved into someone who could spend an entire afternoon teaching a shy child to tie shoes. The hands that had once wielded death with professional excellence now helped small fingers navigate safety scissors and glue sticks, but the skills remained, buried beneath layers of chosen normalcy like weapons cached for emergencies that might never come. Sarah could still read a room's tactical situation in seconds, identify every exit, catalog potential threats, and develop countermeasures faster than most people could process danger. The difference was that in Millbrook, the greatest threat was usually a wasp that wandered through an open window during vacation Bible school. She finished cutting paper figures and moved on to preparing the story materials. The parable of the Good Samaritan would resonate with these children, she knew. They lived in a community where neighbors helped neighbors without question, where leaving your car unlocked wasn't foolishness but faith in human decency. The lesson about helping strangers might seem abstract to children who had never met a stranger, but Sarah would find ways to make it real. The irony struck her again, as it often did during lesson preparation. Here she was, teaching about mercy and compassion, about turning the other cheek and loving one's enemies. The woman who had once been judge, jury, and executioner now spent her Sunday mornings explaining why violence should never be the first response to conflict. Yet Sarah felt no hypocrisy in the contradiction. Her past had shown her the absolute necessity of goodness in a world capable of unimaginable evil. Every life she'd taken had been to prevent greater loss of life, every mission completed in service of protecting the innocent. The children in her classroom represented exactly what she'd fought to preserve: the right to grow up safe, to believe in kindness, to trust that the world contained more good than evil. The church building settled around her with small creaks and sighs as it warmed in the morning sun. Sarah had grown to love these sounds, the wooden building's gentle voice welcoming another day of worship and fellowship. She'd painted these walls, repaired broken chairs, and spent countless hours ensuring this space felt like home for every child who entered. Her phone buzzed softly against the table where she'd placed it. A text message from Janet Brennan, the church secretary. "Coffee's ready in the kitchen when you need it. See you at 8:30. Sarah smiled and typed back a quick thank you. Janet had become one of her closest friends over the years, a woman whose genuine warmth had helped Sarah remember how to trust others with pieces of herself. The friendships she'd built in Millbrook were real, even though they were built on an incomplete foundation. These people knew Sarah, the Sunday school teacher, Sarah, the volunteer at the food bank, Sarah who brought casseroles to families facing illness or loss. They didn't know about the other Sarah, but that didn't make their love for her any less genuine or meaningful. Sarah walked to the window that looked out over the church's small playground, where swings moved gently in the morning breeze. In a few hours, those swings would creak with the weight of children who called her Miss Chun, who competed for her attention and saved their biggest questions for her ears. She'd built this life deliberately, choosing each element with the same careful precision she'd once brought to mission planning. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of morning mist that clung to the mountains surrounding Millbrook. Those mountains had drawn her here initially, their size and permanence, offering a sense of protection she'd never found in cities. She could see threats approaching from miles away across the valley floor, could plan routes of escape or defense using terrain she'd studied until it became part of her subconscious awareness. But 20 years had passed without needing such preparations. 20 years of potluck dinners and Christmas pageants, of teaching children to pray and helping them understand that faith meant trusting in something bigger than their fears. 20 years of building identity so different from her past that sometimes Sarah wondered if the operative had been the real person or just a role she'd played until she was free to become herself. The construction paper figures lay arranged on her table like a congregation waiting for service to begin. Sarah had cut them with perfect precision, each one identical in proportion and size. The attention to detail was unconscious now, muscle memory from a time when millimeter accuracy meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She reached for her lesson plan notebook, reviewing the discussion questions she'd prepared to accompany the craft project. Why do you think the priest and Levite passed by the injured man? What does it mean to be a neighbor? How can we help people who are different from us? Simple questions designed to plant seeds of empathy and understanding in young hearts. Sarah believed deeply in the power of these lessons, perhaps more than anyone else in the congregation. She had seen the world's capacity for cruelty firsthand, had witnessed what happened when empathy died and hatred took root. The children in her classroom represented hope that future generations might choose differently, might build a world where her former skills would never be necessary. Her coffee had grown cold again while she worked. Sarah reheated it in the microwave, a small domestic ritual that still felt foreign after years of drinking. Whatever was available in whatever temperature circumstances allowed. The luxury of hot coffee, of choosing when and how to drink it, remained a gift she never took for granted. The kitchen timer chimed, reminding her to check the banana bread she'd put in the oven before dawn. Baking had become another unexpected passion, a way of showing love that didn't require words or explanations. Every Sunday, Sarah arrived at church with some form of homemade treat for the children, the teachers, or the coffee hour that followed service. She pulled the golden loaves from the oven, their sweet aroma filling her apartment with the kind of warmth she'd never experienced during her operational years. Back then, food had been fuel, consumed quickly and efficiently with no thought for pleasure or comfort. Now the act of creating something beautiful and nourishing felt like a small miracle each time. Sarah wrapped the banana bread in aluminum foil, adding it to the canvas bag that would travel with her to church. Alongside the lesson materials and treats, the bag contained her daily essentials: wallet, keys, phone, and the concealed pistol that had become as automatic as lipstick. The weapon was clean, loaded, and positioned for quick access should the impossible occur. 20 years without drawing it. 20 years without needing the skills that had once defined her existence. Yet Sarah maintained readiness with the same dedication she brought to lesson planning and children's ministry. Some habits transcended retirement. Some instincts remained sharp no matter how peaceful life became. The walk to church took her through Millbrook's heart, past the barber shop where men gathered to discuss weather and local politics, past the diner where teenagers shared milkshakes after Friday night football games. Sarah knew every face, every family story, every small drama that rippled through the community, like stones thrown in still water. Mrs. Patterson waved from her front porch, already dressed for church despite the early hour. "Morning, Sarah. Looking forward to your lesson today." Sarah waved back, genuinely pleased by the greeting. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter attended the high school youth group, and the older woman never missed an opportunity to express gratitude for Sarah's influence on the girl's spiritual development. The interactions were real, the relationships genuine, even though they were built on a foundation of carefully maintained fiction. Sarah had become the person these people knew her to be, growing into the role until it fit as naturally as breathing. The operative had been a character she'd played with consummate skill. The Sunday school teacher was who she'd chosen to become. She reached the church building as the bells in the steeple began their automated morning chime, 8 clear notes that rang across the valley like a call to worship. Sarah climbed the front steps, keys ready, entering the sanctuary that had become her second home. The morning light streamed through stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in jeweled colors. Red and blue and golden yellow scattered across the floor in patterns that shifted as clouds passed overhead. Sarah had spent countless hours in these pews, during services and private moments of prayer, wrestling with questions about forgiveness and redemption that had no easy answers. She made her way to the children's wing, unlocking room 3 and switching on the cheerful overhead lights. The space welcomed her like an old friend. Walls covered with Bible verses and children's artwork, shelves lined with books and supplies. Accumulated over 20 years of dedicated service. Sarah began arranging materials for the morning's project, setting out shoe boxes and construction paper with the same attention to detail that had once characterized her mission briefings. Every element had its place, every tool positioned for maximum efficiency. The children would arrive in 90 minutes, their energy and enthusiasm transforming the quiet classroom into a celebration of learning and faith. As she worked, Sarah's mind drifted to the sermon Pastor Williams would deliver during the main service. He'd been preparing a series on second chances, on the possibility of redemption, even for those who believe themselves beyond forgiveness. The timing felt significant, though Sarah couldn't say whether God was speaking to her or if she was simply reading meaning into coincidence. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of mist that had clung to the mountains. Sarah finished her preparations and stood in the center of her classroom, surrounded by the tools of transformation. In 90 minutes, 7 children would enter this space carrying whatever burdens 7-year-olds could bear. They would leave with new understanding about kindness, about service, about the radical idea that love should extend even to strangers. It was good work, important work, the kind of labor that built foundations for better tomorrows. Sarah had found her calling in this unlikely place, teaching ancient lessons of compassion to children who would carry those lessons into a world that desperately needed them. The woman who had once been called the silent death had become something far more powerful, a voice for life, for hope, for the possibility that even the most broken people could find their way home. She checked her watch. 87 minutes until the children arrived. Time enough for final preparations, for a few moments of prayer, for the quiet centering that would help her be fully present for the young souls who would soon fill her classroom with laughter and questions in the beautiful chaos of learning. Sarah settled into her chair, surrounded by construction paper angels and lesson plans, and allowed herself a moment of gratitude for the life she'd built from the ashes of who she used to be. In 87 minutes, her real work would begin. The black SUVs had arrived at 8:43 a.m., 17 minutes before Sarah's first class was scheduled to begin. She observed them through the classroom window while arranging construction paper on the craft table, her movements deliberately casual despite the tension coiling in her chest. 4 vehicles, positioned at strategic points around the church property. Professional surveillance, not random visitors. Sarah's trained eye cataloged details automatically. Tinted windows that prevented visual confirmation of occupants. License plates from 3 different states, suggesting coordination across jurisdictions. Parking positions that provided multiple escape routes while maintaining clear sightlines to the building's entrances. These weren't federal agents conducting routine business. This was something else entirely. She continued her classroom preparations, using the familiar motions to mask her heightened awareness. 20 years of peace hadn't dulled her operational instincts. If anything, the long absence from that world had sharpened her appreciation for its subtle signals. Normal people didn't notice the difference between casual parking and tactical positioning. Normal people didn't recognize the body language of trained operators pretending to be ordinary citizens. The church building felt different now, transformed from sanctuary to potential battleground by the presence of unknown watchers. Sarah's mind automatically began mapping defensive positions, calculating angles of fire, identifying potential choke points and escape routes. The muscle memory of survival assessment activated, despite her conscious desire to remain in the peaceful world she'd built. Through the window, she watched a figure emerge from the nearest SUV, tall, lean build concealed beneath a dark jacket that hung too perfectly to be hiding anything other than professional equipment. The man stretched casually, but his eyes swept the church grounds with systematic precision. He was conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on terrain and potential obstacles. Sarah moved away from the window, returning to her craft preparations with renewed focus. She needed these 17 minutes to complete her setup and present the appearance of normal Sunday morning routine. Whatever had brought these watchers to Millbrook Methodist, they hadn't made their move yet. That suggested they were still gathering information, still finalizing whatever plan had led them here. Her hands remained steady as she distributed safety scissors around the table, but her mind raced through possibilities. After 20 years, of complete operational silence, what could have surfaced to draw attention to her current life. She'd been meticulous about her cover identity, had built Sarah Chun's existence with the same precision she'd once brought to infiltration operations. The church's front door opened with its familiar squeak, followed by footsteps in the main corridor. Sarah recognized Pastor Williams' distinctive gait, his Sunday morning routine as predictable as her own. He always arrived 90 minutes before service to review his sermon, pray for the congregation, and ensure the building was ready for worship. "Good morning, Sarah," his voice called from the hallway, warm and familiar. Pastor Williams had become more than her employer over the years. He'd been mentor, friend, and spiritual guide during her slow transformation from killer to teacher. Their weekly conversations had helped her navigate the complex theology of redemption and second chances. "Morning, Pastor," Sarah replied, injecting appropriate cheerfulness into her voice. "Coffee's ready in the kitchen if you need it." The exchange felt surreal against the backdrop of surveillance vehicles and unknown threats. She was discussing coffee while calculating how many hostiles might be positioned outside the building. Pastor Williams appeared in her doorway, coffee mug already in hand, his gray hair slightly disheveled from his morning routine. At 67, he moved with the gentle confidence of someone who'd spent 4 decades shepherding souls through life's complexities. His eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from listening to thousands of confessions, doubts, and struggles. "Looks like you're setting up something special today," he observed, noting the elaborate craft materials spread across the table. "The Good Samaritan dioramas." "The children love building things," Sarah said, her voice maintaining its normal cadence despite her elevated awareness. "I thought we'd explore how helping others sometimes requires us to step outside our comfort zones." Pastor Williams nodded approvingly. Timely message. Sometimes God calls us to be brave in ways we never expected. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Sarah wondered if he'd noticed the unusual activity in the parking lot. "I'll let you finish your preparations," he continued, raising his coffee mug in a small salute. "The children are blessed to have someone who cares so deeply about their spiritual growth." After he left, Sarah returned to the window, using the pretense of adjusting the blinds to observe the watchers more closely. 2 more figures had emerged from different vehicles, positioning themselves with casual precision around the church grounds. One examined the memorial garden near the front entrance, his interest in the bronze plaques clearly performative. Another walked the perimeter path that connected the main building to the fellowship hall, his pace too measured to be genuine curiosity. These men moved like operators, their apparent randomness masking systematic intelligence gathering. Sarah counted at least 6 visible personnel, which suggested additional assets positioned beyond her current field of view. The operation was significant, well-funded, and professionally executed. Amateur surveillance would have been obvious and sloppy. This had the hallmarks of serious intelligence work. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message came from an unknown number, the text appearing in stark black letters against the white screen. "We know who you were. We know what you did in Prague. Sunday school ends today." Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Prague, the mission that had earned her the nickname, the Silent Death. The operation that had eliminated a terrorist cell planning to poison the water supply of a city containing 2 million innocent people. The assignment that had been so classified it officially never happened, completed by an operative who technically never existed. Someone had connected Sarah Chin to that ghost from her past. 20 years of careful cover had been penetrated by an enemy with resources, patience, and access to information that should have remained buried forever. The text message wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war against the life she'd built in Millbrook. Sarah deleted the message and slipped the phone back into her purse, her expression maintaining its pleasant composure despite the alarm bells screaming in her consciousness. She had 30 minutes before the children would begin arriving. 30 minutes to assess the threat and develop response options that would protect innocent lives while preserving her cover. The craft materials suddenly felt like props in an elaborate theater production. The construction paper angels and safety scissors seemed absurd against the backdrop of professional killers, positioning themselves around a house of worship. Yet abandoning her routine would signal awareness of the surveillance, potentially triggering whatever plan the watchers had prepared. Sarah forced herself to continue the familiar motions of Sunday morning preparation. She arranged crayons in rainbow order, checked that glue sticks were full, and reviewed her lesson plan one final time. Her hands remained steady, but her mind shifted into tactical mode, processing variables and probabilities with mathematical precision. The children would arrive soon, followed by their parents, followed by the general congregation gathering for morning worship. Roughly 200 innocent people would fill this building within the next hour, transforming from potential hostages into human shields if the situation escalated beyond surveillance into active engagement. Sarah's operational training had included extensive study of terrorist tactics and psychology. Groups that targeted former intelligence operatives rarely settled for simple assassination. They preferred spectacle, maximum casualties, symbolic destruction that would generate media coverage and political impact. A church full of families on Sunday morning represented an ideal soft target for enemies seeking both revenge and propaganda victory. The realization crystallized her situation with brutal clarity. The watchers weren't here just for her. They intended to use the congregation as leverage, to turn her sanctuary into a killing ground that would demonstrate their power while satisfying their desire for vengeance. The children in her classroom would become pawns in a game she'd thought she'd left behind forever. Another text arrived, this one containing a photograph that made Sarah's heart skip. The image showed her apartment building from across the street, taken with telephoto precision that captured her morning coffee ritual through her kitchen window. The timestamp indicated it had been taken just 2 hours ago, while she'd been reviewing lesson plans in blissful ignorance of the net closing around her. The message below the photo was brief. Pretty apartment. Shame if something happened to it, and to everyone inside the church today. Sarah deleted this message as well, her finger moving with mechanical precision while her mind calculated response strategies. The threat was clear and immediate. These people knew where she lived, had been watching her for an unknown period, and were prepared to harm innocent people to achieve their objectives. The peaceful existence she'd built was about to become collateral damage in a war she'd tried to leave behind. 8 minutes until the children arrived. Sarah made her decision with the cold pragmatism that had kept her alive during the darkest chapters of her operational career. She would maintain her cover, continue the charade of normalcy, and protect the congregation by any means necessary. The Sunday school teacher would have to remember how to be the silent death. One more time. She reached into her purse and checked her weapon, confirming the full magazine and chambered round with movements too quick for casual observation. Glock felt familiar in her palm, its weight and balance as comfortable as an old friend. Her finger verified the safety was disengaged, ready for immediate deployment should circumstances demand it. Sarah closed her purse and returned to her craft preparations, her face maintaining its pleasant Sunday morning expression while her mind shifted into combat mode. She cataloged potential weapons within the classroom, scissors that could become blades, craft knives sharp enough to cut more than paper, wooden chairs that could serve as shields or clubs depending on necessity. Building's layout crystallized in her tactical awareness. Multiple exits, including the fire door that led directly outside from the children's wing. Windows large enough for emergency egress. The supply closet connected to the mechanical room, providing access to the building's infrastructure and alternate movement routes. Most importantly, she reviewed the locations where children might take cover if violence erupted. The reading corner contained a heavy wooden table that could stop small arms fire. The coat closet provided concealment, if not protection. The space behind her desk offered angles that would shield young bodies from direct fire, while maintaining her ability to engage threats. Sarah's breathing remained controlled, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through. Her system. This was familiar territory, the mental space she'd occupied during countless high-stakes operations when innocent lives hung in the balance. The difference was that this time, the innocents had names and faces she knew intimately. Timothy Rodriguez, who asked profound questions about faith and justice. Emma Walsh, whose tears over stories of suffering revealed a heart destined for missionary work or social justice. Jacob Thompson, whose struggles with speech had improved dramatically under Sarah's patient guidance. These weren't abstract civilians. To be protected. They were her children, in every way that mattered. The sound of car engines drew her attention back to the window. The first families were arriving, parents walking hand in hand with children dressed in their Sunday best. Sarah watched Mr. Rodriguez lift Timothy from their pickup truck, the boy already chattering excitedly about whatever adventure awaited him in Sunday school. 5 minutes. Sarah took a final inventory of her classroom, ensuring every detail supported the illusion of normalcy while positioning resources for rapid tactical deployment if necessary. The craft supplies were arranged to allow clear movement lanes. The furniture is positioned to create defensive positions without appearing deliberate. Her lesson plan lay open on the desk, the parable of the Good Samaritan ready to guide discussion. About helping strangers and overcoming prejudice. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Here she was, preparing to teach children about mercy and compassion while potentially preparing to kill people who threatened their safety. But perhaps that wasn't irony at all. Perhaps it was the purest expression of love, being willing to become a monster so that innocence could remain innocent, so that children could continue believing in a world where kindness mattered more than violence. The church's front door opened again, this time admitting the cheerful chaos of arriving families. Sarah heard Mrs. Rodriguez calling goodbye to her husband, heard Timothy's excited voice echoing in the hallway as he raced toward the children's wing. In 30 seconds, her real work would begin, maintaining the perfect balance between Sunday, school teacher, and lethal operative, protecting her students while preserving their faith in the goodness of the world. Sarah straightened her navy dress, touched the cross pendant at her throat, and prepared to greet the children who trusted her completely. Whatever came next, she would ensure their innocence remained intact. The watchers outside had made their position clear, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail about former operatives who'd earned legendary status. Retirement didn't mean death of skills, only evolution of purpose. The silent death was about to remember why that nickname had once struck fear into the hearts of terrorists across 3 continents. But this time, she would wield those skills not for government objectives or classified missions, but for 7 children who called her Miss Chun and believed she would always keep them safe. Timothy Rodriguez burst through the classroom door like a small hurricane, his Sunday shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor as he skidded to a stop in front of Sarah's desk. His dark hair was combed neatly to one side, already beginning to rebel against whatever gel his mother had applied, and his white button-down shirt bore a small stain that looked suspiciously like chocolate milk from breakfast. "Miss Chun, Miss Chun. My dad said we're building something today." Timothy's voice carried the breathless excitement that only 8-year-olds could generate over construction paper and glue sticks. His eyes sparkled with anticipation as he spotted the shoeboxes and craft materials arranged on the table. Sarah smiled down at him, her expression warm and genuine despite the ice water flowing through her veins. "Good morning, Timothy. We are indeed building something special today. But first, let's wait for everyone else to arrive so we can start together." Behind Timothy, other families filtered through the church's main entrance. Sarah could hear the familiar sounds of Sunday morning gathering, parents calling reminders about behavior, children's voices echoing off the high ceiling of the sanctuary, the general bustle of a community coming together for worship. These sounds had become the soundtrack of her new life, comforting rhythms that marked the passage of peaceful weeks and months. Emma Walsh appeared next, her blonde hair braided with pink ribbons that matched her dress. She clutched a small stuffed lamb against her chest, a comfort item she'd carried to Sunday school since she was 4 years old. Emma was quiet where Timothy was boisterous, thoughtful where he was impulsive, but equally devoted to the weekly lessons that had shaped both their young understanding of faith and morality. "Good morning, Emma," Sarah said, kneeling to meet the girl at eye level. "I love your ribbons today." "Pink is definitely your color." Emma beamed and hugged her stuffed lamb tighter. "Mama said you might have a story about helping people today." "I like those stories best." "We do have a very special story about helping," Sarah confirmed, her heart aching at the child's innocent enthusiasm. "It's about a man who stopped to help a stranger when no one else would." More children trickled in, each arrival monitored by Sarah's peripheral awareness while she maintained her role as devoted teacher. Jacob Thompson shuffled through the door, his speech therapist's homework sheet clutched in his small fist, ready to share his progress with the woman who had encouraged every small victory in his journey toward clear communication. "Miss Chun," Jacob managed, his face glowing with pride at successfully pronouncing her name. "I practiced the words like you said." "That's wonderful, Jacob," Sarah replied, accepting the homework sheet and making a genuine show of examining his work. "You've been practicing so hard. I can't wait to hear you read part of our story today." The normalcy of these interactions felt surreal against the backdrop of surveillance vehicles and threatening text messages. These children trusted her completely, had no concept of danger beyond scraped knees and hurt feelings. Their world was constructed of safety and love, protected by adults who would never let harm approach their innocence. Sarah intended to keep it that way. Regardless of what forces from her past had emerged to threaten that peace, Bobby Martinez arrived with his characteristic energy, sliding into the classroom on stocking feet after abandoning his dress shoes in the hallway. At 7 years old, Bobby tested every boundary with the persistence of a natural-born rebel, but his mischief was harmless and his heart was pure gold beneath the chaos. "Are we really building cities today, Miss Chun?" Bobby asked, eyeing the craft materials with the calculating expression of someone planning maximum creative destruction. "We're building a scene from a Bible story," Sarah corrected gently. "But yes, there will be roads and buildings involved. And Bobby, we remember to use our walking feet inside the classroom." The boy grinned and switched to an exaggerated slow-motion walk that made the other children giggle. Sarah allowed herself a moment to appreciate the sound of their laughter, storing it against the possibility that this might be the last normal moment they would share. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement near the memorial garden. One of the watchers had positioned himself behind the bronze statue of the church's founding pastor, using the monument as cover while maintaining visual contact with the building's main entrance. The placement was tactically sound but emotionally offensive. Using a sacred memorial as camouflage showed contempt for everything this community represented. Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only outward sign of her growing anger. These people had invaded her sanctuary, threatened children under her protection, and desecrated a place of worship with their presence. Whatever grievance they harbored against her past actions, bringing it into this sacred space crossed a line that demanded response. 6 children had arrived now, with Emma's younger sister Lily making 7. The Walsh girls always traveled as a pair, Lily's 4-year-old energy perfectly complementing Emma's thoughtful nature. They settled at the craft table together, already whispering about what they planned to build with their shoeboxes and construction paper. "Miss Chun," Emma said, raising her hand with formal politeness, "is the Good Samaritan story about being brave?" The question struck Sarah with unexpected force. What do you mean, sweetie? Well, if everyone else was scared to help the hurt man, the Good Samaritan had to be brave to stop, right? Even if it might be dangerous? Sarah knelt beside Emma's chair, meeting the girl's earnest blue eyes. That's a very wise observation, Emma. Sometimes being good does require being brave. Sometimes helping others means facing our fears. Were you ever scared to help someone, Miss Chun? The innocent question opened a door Sarah couldn't walk through, revealing truths that had no place in a Sunday school classroom. We all feel scared sometimes, Emma, but we choose to help anyway, because love is stronger than fear. It wasn't a lie, exactly. Sarah had felt fear during many operations, but she'd learned to channel that fear into heightened awareness and surgical precision. Fear kept operatives alive when channeled correctly. It became a tool rather than a weakness, sharpening reaction time and tactical thinking when lives hung in the balance. The irony of her current situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, about to demonstrate the Good Samaritan principle in its most literal sense, protecting strangers from danger, even at personal cost. The children didn't know they were strangers to the men outside, but Sarah understood that her past had made them targets by association. That another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. This one a white panel van with commercial plates that suggested a service company. But the van parked away from the building's service entrance, positioning instead for rapid evacuation and cargo loading. Sarah's stomach clenched as she recognized the tactical significance. The watchers weren't just conducting surveillance anymore. They were preparing for extraction. Miss Chun? Timothy's voice broke through her analysis. Are you okay? You look like my mom does when she's worried about something. Sarah refocused on the boy's concerned face, forcing her expression back into its customary warmth. I'm fine, Timothy. Just thinking about our lesson today. Are you ready to learn about being a good neighbor? Yes, ma'am. Timothy replied with enthusiasm that made Sarah's heart ache. These children radiated trust and innocence, qualities that would make them vulnerable if the situation deteriorated. They had no frame of reference for real danger, no survival instincts beyond looking both ways before crossing streets. Sarah moved to her desk and opened the lesson plan notebook, using the motion to conceal her visual sweep of the classrooms. Defensive positions. The heavy wooden reading table could provide cover for 3 children if positioned correctly. The supply closet's steel door might stop pistol rounds, but not rifle fire. The windows offered escape routes but were 30 feet above ground level, making them viable only as last resort options. Her mind automatically calculated fields of fire, identifying corners where muzzle flash wouldn't blind her night vision. Positions that would allow her to engage multiple targets while maintaining protection for the children. The tactical analysis felt obscene in this environment, but Sarah couldn't shut off 25 years of training that had kept her alive. Through situations where hesitation measured life in milliseconds. Miss Chun, Emma said quietly, there are some men outside looking at our church. Do you think they want to come to Sunday school too? Sarah's blood pressure spiked, but her voice remained calm. Some people are just curious about our beautiful church, Emma. They're probably admiring the stained glass windows or the memorial garden. Emma nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and returned to organizing her craft materials with the methodical precision she brought to every project. The girl's attention to detail reminded Sarah of herself at that age, before life had taught her that precision could mean survival, that careful planning might be all that stood between civilization and chaos. The wall clock showed 8:57, 3 minutes until class officially began, but Sarah always started promptly regardless of late arrivals. Structure and routine provided security for children, predictable rhythms that helped them feel safe and valued. She would maintain that routine today, despite the extraordinary circumstances developing outside. All right, my wonderful students, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the cheerful authority that had guided thousands of lessons over 2 decades. Let's gather in our circle for opening prayer and our Bible story. The children moved to their designated spots on the reading carpet, a colorful oval rug that had hosted countless stories, discussions, and moments of spiritual growth. They sat cross-legged, faces turned toward Sarah with the automatic attention that good teachers earn through consistency and genuine care. Sarah settled into her chair, the worn fabric embracing her like an old friend. From this position, she maintained clear sightlines to both the door and window, while appearing completely focused on the children gathered at her feet. Her purse rested within easy reach, positioned for rapid access should circumstances demand it. Before we begin our story today, Sarah said, let's bow our heads and thank God for bringing us together safely. The children closed their eyes obediently, small hands folded in their laps with varying degrees of success. Sarah kept her own eyes open, using the prayer time to conduct final reconnaissance through the window. The watchers had shifted positions, again, moving closer to the building with predatory patience. Dear God, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the chaos building in her peripheral awareness. Thank you for these beautiful children, for their eager hearts and curious minds. Help us learn together today about kindness and courage. Keep us all safe in your loving care. Amen. Amen, the children chorused, raising their heads with expectant faces. They were ready for adventure, ready to build and create and explore the moral complexities of ancient wisdom through construction. Paper and imagination. Sarah opened her Bible to the marked passage, the pages worn soft from years of handling. The Good Samaritan story had never felt more relevant or more urgent than it did in this moment, with real strangers approaching who would need real help, though not the kind the parable originally described. Today we're learning about a very important story, Sarah began, her voice taking on the storytelling cadence that had captivated young audiences for 20 years. It's about a man who was traveling on a dangerous road and what happened when he met trouble. As she spoke, Sarah's awareness expanded to encompass multiple layers of reality. On the surface, she was beginning another Sunday morning lesson about compassion and moral courage. Beneath that, she was preparing 7 innocent children for a potential combat situation, while maintaining their psychological safety and trust. The watchers outside continued their positioning, professional operators implementing a plan that had been carefully researched and meticulously prepared. They knew her past identity, had tracked her to this unlikely refuge, and were prepared to use maximum violence to achieve their objectives. Whatever grudge they carried against the silent death was about to collide with the life Sarah Chun had built from love and faith, but they had made one critical error in their intelligence gathering. They saw a middle-aged Sunday school teacher who had been out of the game for 2 decades, someone whose skills had probably atrophied from disuse and whose reflexes had been dulled by comfortable civilian life. They didn't understand that some skills never disappeared, only deepened. They didn't realize that 20 years of caring for children had given her something more dangerous than any weapon, a protective instinct so fierce it would make her former reputation seem gentle by comparison. The silent death had been a professional, eliminating targets with clinical efficiency and emotional detachment. But Miss Chen was a mother figure to every child in this room, and maternal fury was a force that could move mountains or level cities, depending on what threatened her young. Sarah began telling the story of the Good Samaritan while her mind finished calculating the tactical equation that would determine whether these children lived or died. The watchers had numbers and surprise on their side, but they were operating on foreign ground against an opponent who had spent 20 years learning every inch of this building and developing relationships with people who would do anything to protect their children. Moreover, they had revealed their presence too early, giving her precious minutes to prepare instead of achieving the total surprise that made hostage situations so deadly. That mistake suggested either overconfidence or incomplete intelligence about her current capabilities. Either way, it would be their last mistake. So the priest saw the hurt man lying by the road, Sarah continued, her voice maintaining its gentle rhythm while her mind completed final preparations for war. But instead of stopping to help, he crossed to the other side and kept walking. The children listened with rapt attention, completely absorbed in the ancient story, beautifully unaware that their Sunday school teacher was about to demonstrate its principles in ways the original parable could never have imagined. The classroom door swung open with unnecessary force, interrupting Sarah's explanation of how the Levite had also passed by the wounded traveler. A man stood in the doorway, his presence immediately wrong in every detail that mattered. He wore a visitor's badge from the church office, but his eyes swept the room with tactical precision rather than pastoral curiosity. His smile was practiced, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. "Excuse me," the man said, his accent carrying traces of Eastern European inflection, barely masked by years of English practice. "I'm looking for Sarah Chun. The secretary said I might find her here." The children turned toward the stranger with natural curiosity, their attention shifting from the parable to this unexpected interruption. Timothy raised his hand as if answering a question in regular school. Emma hugged her stuffed lamb closer. Instinctively sensing something off about the visitor's energy dots, Sarah rose from her chair with deliberate calm, placing herself between the stranger and her students. "I'm Sarah Chun. How can I help you?" Her voice maintained its Sunday school sweetness while her mind cataloged threat indicators. The man's stance favored his right side, suggesting a shoulder holster. His jacket bulged slightly near the left hip, indicating a backup weapon. His shoes were tactical boots disguised as dress shoes, built for rapid movement rather than style. "I represent a documentary production company," the man said, reaching slowly into his jacket pocket. "We're researching individuals with interesting backgrounds for a series about second chances in small-town America." Sarah's hand moved incrementally toward her purse while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "I'm afraid you might have the wrong person. I've been teaching Sunday school here for 20 years. Not much of a story, really." The man's smile widened, becoming predatory. "Oh, but there is quite a story, isn't there? Especially about your time in Prague." June 2003, the water treatment facility incident. The words hit Sarah like physical blows, confirming her worst fears while simultaneously triggering responses she'd hoped never to need again. Prague, the operation that had eliminated 7 members of a radical cell planning to poison 2 million people. The mission that had earned her the designation, the Silent Death, from terrorist networks across 3 continents. Sarah's peripheral vision caught Timothy raising his hand again. "Miss Chun, who's in Prague? Is that where Jesus lived?" The innocent question from her student snapped Sarah back to immediate reality. 7 children sat on the reading carpet, their faces turned between her and the stranger with growing confusion. Whatever happened next, their psychological safety was paramount. They could not be allowed to witness violence or understand the true nature of the threat developing around them. "Prague is a city far away, Timothy," Sarah answered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Why don't you and the other children start working on your dioramas while I speak with this gentleman in the hallway?" "But Miss Chun," Emma protested, "you said we'd hear the story together first." "We will, sweetheart. I just need to answer this man's questions about something grown-up and boring. Keep working on your projects, and I'll be right back with our story." The children accepted this explanation with the trusting compliance that made Sarah's heart ache. They gathered around the craft table, chattering softly about their construction plans while reaching for scissors and glue sticks. Their complete faith in her ability to handle any problem made the current situation even more desperate. Sarah gestured toward the hallway, indicating the stranger should step outside the classroom. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more appropriate. The man's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened with satisfaction. Of course. Though I should mention that my colleagues are very interested in meeting the famous Sarah Chen as well. They're positioned throughout the building, eager to discuss your fascinating career transition. The threat was clear and immediate. Multiple hostiles had infiltrated the church during normal Sunday morning activities, using the congregation's openness against them. Sarah had perhaps minutes before the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation into active violence. She stepped into the hallway, pulling the classroom door partially closed behind her to shield the children from whatever came next. The man followed, maintaining a conversational distance that could shift to combat range in seconds. His positioning was professional, keeping multiple escape routes available while blocking Sarah's direct path back to her students. You're operational. Files make for fascinating reading, the man continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry to curious young ears. 13 confirmed eliminations across 4 years of active duty, each one a masterpiece of precision and timing. The Prague operation was particularly impressive. Sarah's mind raced through identification protocols, searching her memory for faces from old intelligence briefings. The man's features were generic, professionally unremarkable, but something about his voice triggered recognition. Dmitry Volkov, former Spetsnaz, later recruited by private military contractors specializing in revenge operations. I think you have me confused with someone else, Sarah said, maintaining her cover despite the certainty that it was already compromised. I'm just a Sunday school teacher. I've never been to Prague. Volkov laughed softly, the sound containing no humor. Your legend was well constructed, I'll grant that. 20 years of deep cover, building relationships, establishing credibility. Very professional work. But facial recognition software has advanced considerably since your retirement. He produced a tablet from his jacket, the screen displaying a split image that made Sarah's breath catch. On the left, a surveillance photo of her entering the church this morning. On the right, a classified intelligence photo taken in Prague 22 years ago, showing a woman in tactical gear whose face was unmistakably hers. Biometric analysis confirms a 97% probability match, Volkov said, studying Sarah's reaction with professional interest. Bone structure doesn't lie, even with 20 years of aging and different styling choices. Sarah stared at the images, seeing the ghost of her former self reflected in technology that hadn't existed when she'd vanished into civilian life. The operational security that had protected her identity for 2 decades had been shattered by advances in digital analysis and facial recognition algorithms. The Kozlov brothers send their regards, Volkov continued, his voice carrying personal satisfaction now. You killed their father in Prague. Eliminated him like he was nothing more than an obstacle to your mission objectives. The name triggered immediate recall of classified files and target assessments. Viktor Kozlov, biochemist turned terrorist, architect of the water poisoning plot that would have killed millions. Sarah remembered every detail of that elimination. The abandoned warehouse where Kozlov had been coordinating the final phases of his plan. The precision rifle shot that had ended his life from 800 meters away. The intelligence windfall discovered in his personal effects that had prevented 3 additional attacks. Viktor Kozlov was planning mass murder, Sarah replied, abandoning pretense now that her identity was confirmed. Stopping him saved 2 million innocent lives. Including the life of my nephew, Volkov said, his mask of professional detachment slipping to reveal genuine emotion beneath. 8 years old at the time, living in Prague with his mother. The revelation shifted the moral landscape in ways that made Sarah's chest tighten. She'd never considered that Kozlov might have family, innocent relatives who would suffer from his death, despite having no part in his crimes. The operational mindset had focused on mission objectives and casualty prevention, not on the secondary consequences that rippled outward from every eliminated target. The nephew grew up to be quite successful, Volkov continued. Earned advanced degrees in computer science and digital forensics. Spent years developing the facial recognition algorithms that finally identified you. Technology advances, but revenge remains constant. Through the partially open classroom door, Sarah could hear the children working on their projects, their voices mixing in the cheerful chaos of creative collaboration. Bobby was explaining his elaborate construction plans to anyone who would listen. Emma was helping Lily navigate safety scissors with patient guidance. Jacob was proudly reading color names aloud as he selected construction paper. These sounds represented everything Sarah had fought to protect during her operational years, the innocent normalcy that existed because people like her stood between civilization and those who would destroy it. Now that innocence was threatened by the unintended consequences of her own actions, by enemies who had spent decades planning this confrontation. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Justice for Viktor Kozlov. Payment for the lives you stole. But first, we want you to understand the cost of your choices." Volkov gestured toward the classroom door. 7 children. Approximately 200 congregation members gathering for morning worship. A small town that trusts you completely, has no idea who you really are. The threat crystallized with brutal clarity. These men intended to use the congregation as leverage, to make Sarah watch innocent people suffer for her past actions before finally settling their blood debt. The church had become a battlefield not because of any action taken by its members, but because Sarah's presence had contaminated their sanctuary with violence from her former life. "The children have nothing to do with this," Sarah said, her voice hardening with protective fury. "Your quarrel is with me alone." "True," Volkov agreed, "but isolation is part of the lesson. You spent your career eliminating people in isolation, cutting them off from family and future with surgical precision. Today, you learn what that feels like from the other perspective." Sarah's mind shifted into full operational mode, analyzing variables and calculating response options with the cold efficiency that had once made her legend among intelligence professionals. 7 children in her immediate care. Approximately 20 adults in various locations throughout the building. Unknown number of hostiles with unknown weapons and capabilities. The tactical situation was complex, but not hopeless. The children's wing had multiple exits and could be isolated from the main sanctuary if necessary. The building's construction offered numerous defensive positions and concealment options. Most importantly, the hostiles had revealed themselves too early, sacrificing the element of total surprise that would have made this situation unwinnable. "You have 60 seconds to consider our proposal," Volkov said, checking an expensive watch with casual precision. "Join us voluntarily and the children remain unharmed. They'll simply remember that Miss Chun had to leave suddenly for a family emergency, resist, and they become part of the lesson." Inside the classroom, Timothy's voice rose above the others as he described his diorama plans with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm. "I'm gonna make the road really long, so the Good Samaritan has to walk extra far to help the hurt man. That makes him even more good, right, Miss Chun?" The boy's question pierced Sarah's heart with its perfect timing and innocent wisdom. Sometimes, being good did mean walking farther than expected, facing dangers that others wouldn't dare approach. Sometimes love demanded sacrifices that couldn't be measured or understood by those who benefited from them. Sarah looked into Volkov's eyes and saw the cold patience of someone who had spent years planning this moment. Behind him, she glimpsed additional movement in the hallway as other operatives took positions throughout the building. The net was closing, but it hadn't sealed completely yet. 50 seconds, Volkov announced, his voice carrying the finality of countdown. Sarah's hand moved toward her purse with deliberate slowness, her fingers finding the familiar weight of the concealed Glock. After 20 years of peace, after building a life dedicated to nurturing innocence and teaching love, she was about to remember why enemies had once whispered her name in terror across 3 continents. But this time, she wouldn't be fighting for government objectives or classified missions. This time, she would become the silent death for the most sacred reason possible, protecting 7 children who called her Miss Chun and trusted her to keep them safe. The Sunday school lesson was about to become tragically literal. Sarah was going to show these children what it really meant to be a good Samaritan, even when helping others required walking through the valley of death itself. 40 seconds, Volkov said, his finger moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Sarah smiled with the serene confidence that had once frozen blood in hardened killers' veins, her voice soft enough that only Volkov could hear the promise it contained. Class is in session. Sarah's transformation happened in the space between heartbeats, 20 years of careful restraint dissolving like morning mist. The Sunday school teacher's gentle smile remained perfectly in place while her body shifted into combat stance, weight redistributing to balls of her feet, center of gravity lowering for maximum stability and explosive movement potential. Volkov registered the change a fraction of a second too late. His hand was already moving toward his concealed weapon when Sarah's elbow drove into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The impact folded him forward, driving air from his lungs in a sharp wheeze that echoed off the hallway's wooden walls. Sarah's follow-up was instantaneous and devastating. Her knee rose to meet his descending face, the collision producing a wet crack as cartilage separated and blood began flowing from his shattered nose. Volkov stumbled backward, his weapon clearing leather just as Sarah's hand clamped down on his wrist with crushing force. The gun clattered to the floor as Sarah twisted his arm with movements that looked almost like dancing, her Sunday dress swirling around her knees while she applied pressure points that sent lightning bolts of agony through Volkov's nervous system. His eyes widened in shock and pain, the professional confidence evaporating as he realized he'd catastrophically underestimated his target. "Miss Chun?" Timothy's voice drifted from the classroom, curiosity evident in his tone. "Is everything okay out there?" Sarah maintained her grip on Volkov's twisted arm while calling back through the door, her voice retaining its characteristic warmth despite the violence unfolding in the hallway. "Everything's fine, Timothy. The gentleman just needs help finding the bathroom. Keep working on your projects." She increased pressure on the nerve cluster in Volkov's wrist, watching his face contort as pain signals overwhelmed his ability to think clearly. "How many?" she whispered, her lips close to his ear. "How many operatives are in the building?" Volkov's training fought against the agony radiating up his arm, but Sarah knew exactly how much pressure to apply to break through professional conditioning. She'd learned these techniques from experts who understood that information extraction sometimes required immediate results rather than prolonged sessions. 12, Volkov gasped, sweat beading on his forehead as Sarah found another pressure point that made his knees buckle. 12 operators. The building is surrounded. No escape. Sarah's mind processed the intelligence while maintaining perfect physical control over her captive. 12 hostiles represented a significant force, but the number also suggested limitations. A larger operation would have deployed more personnel. This was a revenge mission rather than a military assault, personal rather than political, which meant emotions might override tactical discipline at crucial moments. She guided Volkov deeper into the hallway, away from the classroom door, using his body as a shield while scanning for additional threats. The church's main corridor stretched empty in both directions, but Sarah knew that appearance was deceptive. Professional operators would be moving through the building like ghosts, taking positions that maximized their advantage while minimizing civilian casualties until the final phase began. The children, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried an unmistakable menace. "They're not part of this equation. Whatever happens between us, they remain untouched." Volkov tried to straighten, testing her grip, but Sarah's leverage was perfect. 20 years of physical conditioning through yoga and martial arts had maintained flexibility and core strength that most people her age had surrendered to desk jobs and comfortable living. The Sunday school teacher's body contained muscles that remembered exactly how to disable threats efficiently. Children become involved when their teacher refuses cooperation. Volkov managed, his accent thickening as pain interfered with his English pronunciation. Simple choice. Come quietly, die quickly, minimal collateral damage. Sarah's response was to shift her grip slightly, finding the nerve cluster that controlled his dominant hand. Volkov's fingers went numb instantly, his backup weapon useless. Even if he could reach it. The technique was precise, temporary, and completely debilitating when applied correctly. "Wrong answer," Sarah murmured, guiding him toward the supply closet at the hallway's end. "Let me show you how Sunday school teachers handle classroom management problems." The supply closet was cramped but private, lined with shelves containing cleaning supplies, extra Bibles, and seasonal decorations for various church holidays. Sarah maneuvered Volkov inside with professional efficiency, using his compromised balance against him while maintaining awareness of potential weapons within reach. She positioned him against the back wall, his twisted arm creating a lever that kept him completely under her control. The confined space worked to her advantage, limiting his ability to use superior size or reach while maximizing her leverage and striking opportunities. "Prague was a long time ago," Sarah said, her voice conversational despite the violent tableau. "Viktor Kozlov was planning to murder 2 million people. Men, women, children, families who had never harmed anyone. I stopped him. That's not something I apologize for." "He was father to my nephew," Volkov replied through gritted teeth. "Only the family the boy had after war took his mother." Sarah's expression softened slightly, genuine regret flickering across her features. "I'm sorry for the boy's loss. But his father's grief didn't justify mass murder. Sometimes protecting innocence requires terrible choices. Like choice you make now," Volkov said, seizing on her moment of emotional vulnerability. "Nephew grew up brilliant, angry. Spent years finding you. Built organization dedicated to settling family debt. 12 operators trained specifically for this mission." The revelation that this operation was personal rather than professional changed Sarah's tactical assessment significantly. Personal vindictiveness often meant emotional decision-making, but it also meant absolute commitment. These people wouldn't retreat or negotiate. They'd fight to the death to honor family obligation, making them more dangerous than professionals. Who could calculate acceptable losses? Sarah heard footsteps in the main corridor, measured and purposeful, suggesting additional operatives moving into position throughout the building. The timeline was accelerating. Soon, maintaining the pretense of normal Sunday morning activities would become impossible. "Your nephew," Sarah said, genuine curiosity mixing with tactical questioning. "What's his name?" "Alexei Kozlov," Volkov replied with obvious pride. "Graduated MAT with a doctoral degree in computer systems and artificial intelligence. Built facial recognition software that found you when government agencies could not." Sarah filed the intelligence while listening to the approaching footsteps. At least 3 additional hostiles moved through the building, their coordination suggesting they were following a predetermined timeline. Church services began at 10 o'clock, which meant the sanctuary would start filling with families in approximately 20 minutes. "Alexei must be quite gifted," Sarah acknowledged, genuinely impressed despite the circumstances. "Using his talents to honor family is admirable, even if his methods are questionable." Inside the classroom, She could hear the children's voices growing slightly louder as their initial focus on craft projects gave way to curiosity about her extended absence. Timothy was probably organizing some sort of investigation, his natural leadership emerging whenever adult supervision relaxed. "Timothy," she called through the closed door, maintaining her cheerful teacher voice while keeping Volkov immobilized. "Remember to share the glue sticks. Everyone gets a turn." "Yes, Miss Chun." Timothy's voice replied immediately, followed by sounds of renewed activity as the children redirected their attention to construction paper and creativity. Sarah returned her focus to Volkov, whose face had gone pale from sustained nerve pressure, but whose eyes remained alert and calculating. Professional training fought against physical distress, but the information extraction was nearly complete. "Timeline," she whispered. "When does the main assault begin?" Volkov's resistance crumbled as Sarah found another pressure point that sent fire through his shoulder and down into his chest. 10:15, he gasped. During the opening hymn. Maximum congregation, maximum impact, 27 minutes. Sarah processed the timeline while maintaining perfect physical control. The operation was designed to begin after families had gathered, but before anyone could leave, trapping the maximum number of hostages with minimal escape opportunities. Professional timing that demonstrated extensive reconnaissance and planning. Positions. Sarah continued her interrogation. "Where are your people deployed?" "Sanctuary exits are covered," Volkov replied through gritted teeth. "Fellowship hall secured. Children's wing isolated. No one leaves until the mission is complete." The intelligence painted a grim tactical picture. The church building had then transformed into a controlled environment, every exit monitored or blocked, every potential refuge compromised. The hostiles had used Sunday morning routine against the congregation, allowing people to enter while preventing anyone from leaving. Sarah's mind raced through response options, calculating probabilities and potential outcomes with mathematical precision. Direct confrontation was possible but risky, potentially exposing the children to crossfire or retaliation. Evacuation required clearing multiple defensive positions while protecting non-combatants who had no training or awareness of proper emergency procedures. "The children in my classroom," Sarah said, her voice carrying deadly promise. "They're not part of your revenge fantasy. Whatever debt you think I owe, it doesn't include innocent 7-year-olds who've never heard of Prague or your family." Volkov's laugh was bitter, tinged with pain but still defiant. "Children learn from their teachers' choices. Today they learn that actions have consequences, that heroes from storybooks don't exist in the real world." Sarah's grip tightened involuntarily. Muscle memory from interrogation training overriding conscious restraint. Volkov's gasp of pain echoed in the confined space, but his expression remained stubborn. These people had committed completely to their revenge mission, accepting casualties and consequences as necessary prices for family honor. The footsteps in the corridor had stopped, replaced by the subtle sounds of operators taking concealed positions throughout the building. Sarah could identify at least 3 distinct locations where hostiles had settled into overwatch positions, probably equipped with communication gear that would coordinate the final assault phase. She needed to end this preliminary phase and return to her classroom before the children's natural curiosity overcame their obedience. Timothy especially had a tendency to investigate anything that seemed unusual, and his absence might trigger exploratory behavior that would expose him to danger. "One last question," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely audible levels. "Alexei Kozlov, is he here?" Volkov's eyes flickered with surprise, then calculation. Why would brilliant computer scientists dirty hands with field operations? He designed mission, provided intelligence, coordinates from safe distance. The answer provided both relief and concern. Relief that the mastermind was absent from the immediate tactical situation. concerned that someone with advanced technical skills was monitoring the operation remotely, possibly through surveillance systems Sarah hadn't detected or countermeasures she couldn't neutralize. "Thank you for the information," Sarah said with genuine politeness. Then she applied pressure to the carotid artery with surgical precision, cutting blood flow to Volkov's brain just long enough to render him unconscious without causing permanent damage. His body went limp in her arms, and Sarah guided his collapse. To ensure he wouldn't injure himself against the closet's shelves, she used zip ties from the craft supplies to secure his hands and feet, then gagged him with paper towels and duct tape. Professional restraint applied with Sunday school materials. Sarah checked her appearance in the small mirror hanging on the back of the closet door. Her hair remained perfectly in place, her navy dress showed no signs of struggle, and her expression had returned to its customary warmth. To any casual observer, she looked exactly like a devoted Sunday school teacher returning from a brief. Interruption. She stepped back into the hallway, closing the supply closet door quietly behind her. The corridor appeared empty, but Sarah's enhanced awareness detected the subtle signs of concealed watchers, irregular shadows near doorways, slight variations in air circulation that suggested breathing patterns, the faint electronic hum of communication equipment. 20-4 minutes until the main assault began. Sarah had perhaps 5 minutes before Volkov's absence would be noticed by his colleagues, triggering either search protocols or acceleration of their timeline. Every second now was precious, measured in heartbeats and children's laughter and the narrowing space between peace and war. She reached for the classroom door handle, preparing to re-enter the world of construction paper angels and innocent questions about ancient parables. Behind that door waited 7 children who trusted her completely, who believed Miss Chun could handle any problem life presented. They were about to discover they were absolutely right. Sarah stepped back into her classroom with the same gentle smile she'd worn for 20 years, but everything had changed in ways the children couldn't perceive. The 7 young faces turned toward her with expectant joy, their craft projects progressing exactly as planned, their world still innocent and safe in the space between heartbeats. "Sorry for the interruption," Sarah said, settling back into her chair with movements that appeared casual but positioned her with clear sightlines to both door and window. "Now, where were we in our story about the Good Samaritan?" Emma raised her hand eagerly. The priest and the Levite both walked away from the hurt man, but someone else was coming down the road. "Exactly right, Emma. Someone who was supposed to be an enemy. Someone the hurt man might have expected to cause more harm rather than offer help." Sarah opened her Bible while her peripheral vision tracked movement outside the window. 2 more operatives had taken positions near the playground equipment, their presence transforming the cheerful swings and slides into potential cover for crossfire. The morning sun cast their shadows across the memorial garden, where families often brought children to learn about church history and community sacrifice. But Sarah's tactical assessment was interrupted by an unexpected sound from the main corridor. Rapid footsteps, multiple sets, moving with urgency rather than stealth. The timeline was accelerating beyond Volkov's intelligence, suggesting something had triggered early activation of the assault phase. "Children," Sarah said with sudden authority that made all 7 students look up from their projects. "I need you to listen very carefully to Miss Chun right now. We're going to play a special game called Silent Heroes." Timothy's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of game, Miss Chun?" "The kind where we practice being very quiet and very brave, just like the Good Samaritan was brave when he helped the stranger." Sarah rose from her chair, moving toward her desk while maintaining eye contact with her students. "I need all of you to crawl under the reading table and stay there until I tell you the game is over." Emma's face creased with concern. "Are we in trouble, Miss Chun? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You've all been perfect. This is just a practice drill, like fire drills at regular school." Sometimes grown-ups need to practice keeping children safe. Sarah reached her desk and opened the bottom drawer, revealing items that had waited 20 years for this moment. A tactical knife, matte black and perfectly balanced. 2 spare magazines for her concealed pistol. A small device that would jam cell phone signals in a 50-foot radius. Emergency equipment disguised as office supplies, hidden in plain sight. Among lesson plans and craft materials, the classroom door exploded inward. Wooden splinters flying as a steel-toed boot connected with the lock mechanism. 3 operatives flowed through the opening with fluid precision, automatic weapons raised and ready, their movements coordinated through years of professional training. But they found empty air, where their target should have been standing. Sarah had moved the instant the door began splintering, her body dropping behind her desk while her hand found the Glock in her purse. The children's screams pierced the air as they scrambled under the reading table, their innocent world shattering in milliseconds of violence and chaos. The lead operative swept his weapon left while his companions moved right and center. Standard room-clearing protocol that should have trapped any defender in overlapping fields of fire. But Sarah wasn't where tactical doctrine suggested she should be. She emerged from behind the desk at an angle they hadn't anticipated. Her Sunday dress torn at the knee from her rapid movement, her first shot taking the center operative in the chest before he could adjust his aim. The suppressed pistol's cough was barely audible beneath the children's terrified cries. The remaining 2 hostiles pivoted toward her with professional speed. But Sarah was already moving again. She used Emma's small chair as a launching platform, vaulting over the craft table while her second shot caught the left operative in the throat. His weapon discharged into the ceiling, sending plaster dust raining down on the cowering children. The third operative got his rifle lined up just as Sarah landed behind the bookshelf, wooden shelves exploding as high-velocity rounds chewed through children's books and biblical commentary. Paper fragments filled the air like snow, the literary destruction somehow more obscene than the violence that caused it. Sarah waited for the brief pause as the operative reloaded, then rolled left around the bookshelf's end. Her third shot was center mass, textbook placement that dropped him instantly. 3 threats neutralized in under 10 seconds. Professional elimination disguised as desperate survival. The classroom fell silent except for muffled sobbing from under the reading table, and the distant sounds of chaos erupting throughout the rest of the building. Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up gunfire from the sanctuary, shouts of confusion and terror from the fellowship hall, the systematic sounds of a coordinated assault beginning ahead of schedule. "Children," Sarah called softly, her voice returning to its familiar gentleness despite the carnage surrounding them. "The game isn't over yet. I need you to stay exactly where you are and keep being brave and quiet." Timothy's voice emerged from under the table, shaky but determined. "Miss Chun, those men had guns. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Timothy. Those men were playing a different kind of game, a grown-up game that got too rough. But Miss Chun knows how to handle rough games." Sarah moved among the fallen operatives with clinical efficiency, collecting their weapons and communication gear while maintaining verbal contact with her students. Their psychological state was paramount now. Whatever trauma they were experiencing had to be managed carefully to prevent long-term emotional damage. "Emma," Sarah called, "are you taking care of your sister like a good big sister?" "Yes, miss." "Chun." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Lily's scared, but I told her you would keep us safe." "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Miss Chun will always keep you safe, no matter what happens." The promise carried absolute conviction. Sarah would die before allowing harm to reach these children, would become a monster if necessary to preserve their innocence. The silent death had returned not for government agencies or classified objectives, but for 7 young souls who called her Miss Chun and trusted her with their lives. She examined the communication equipment taken from the fallen operatives, recognizing the frequency bands and encryption protocols from her operational years. The gear was state-of-the-art, military-grade, confirming that this revenge mission had serious financial backing and professional resources. Through the tactical radio, she could hear coordination chatter as the remaining operatives adjusted to the loss of their classroom team. Voices spoke in rapid Russian, reporting casualties and requesting permission to escalate to maximum violence protocols. The veneer of controlled operation was dissolving into desperate improvisation. Sarah keyed the radio, speaking in fluent Russian that carried the authority of command. "This is Sarah Chun. I have 7 children under my protection. Anyone who approaches this classroom dies. Anyone who harms a civilian dies slowly." The radio chatter stopped instantly, replaced by shocked silence as the operatives processed the implications. Their target had just announced her identity while demonstrating lethal capability, transforming from hunted prey into hunting predator. In the span of 10 seconds, a new voice emerged from the radio static, younger and carrying the educated accent of advanced education. "Aunt Sarah," Alexei Kozlov said, his English perfect despite obvious emotional strain, "you killed my father. Your father was about to murder 2 million innocent people, Alexei. I stopped him. That's not something I regret. He was trying to prevent American expansion into sacred Russian territory, protecting homeland from foreign corruption." Sarah's heart ached for the pain in the young man's voice, but her tactical assessment remained coldly accurate. "Your father was going to poison children, Alexei. Children just like the ones in my classroom right now. Whatever political justification he claimed, mass murder of innocents is never acceptable." The silence stretched for long seconds before Alexei's voice returned, harder now and stripped of sentiment. "You have something that belongs to my family, your life. Today we collect that debt with interest." Sarah heard vehicles starting outside, engines revving with the urgency of tactical repositioning. The hostiles were shifting to containment protocol, preparing to siege the building while preventing escape or outside intervention. Local law enforcement was probably already being managed through false emergency calls that would disperse first responders across the county. "Timothy," Sarah said, moving toward the reading table where the children remained hidden, "I need you to be the classroom leader while Miss Chun handles some complicated grown-up problems." Timothy's face appeared from under the table, streaked with tears but determined to be brave. "What do you need me to do, Miss Chun?" "Take care of everyone. Make sure they stay under the table where it's safest. If any strangers come to the door, you tell them that Miss Chun said to wait in the hallway. Are those bad men coming back?" Jacob asked, his voice small and frightened. Sarah knelt beside the table, reaching under to touch each child's hand in reassurance. "Some confused people are having an argument with Miss Chun about something that happened a long time ago. But children are never part of grown-up arguments, so you're going to stay safe right here while I sort everything out." She could see the questions in their eyes, the struggle to understand why their peaceful Sunday morning had transformed into something from action movies they weren't allowed to watch. But they trusted her completely, believed with absolute faith that Miss Chun would make everything okay because she always had before. "I love you all very much," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of potential goodbye. "No matter what happens, remember that you are brave and good and loved." Sarah stood and moved toward the window, her transformed awareness cataloging targets and calculating engagement protocols. Outside, she could see muzzle flashes beginning to strobe from the sanctuary windows as the main assault commenced. Pastor Williams and nearly 200 congregation members were trapped in crossfire, their Sunday morning worship becoming a killing ground. The radio crackled with Alexei's voice, cold with finality. "You have 60 seconds to exit the building and surrender yourself for transport. Every second of delay costs 1 civilian life, beginning with the elderly minister who was curious about our vehicles." Sarah's protective fury crystallized into something beyond human emotion, becoming a force of nature that transformed her completely. The Sunday school teacher vanished, replaced by the operative whose reputation had once frozen blood in terrorist networks. Across 3 continents, she moved toward the classroom door with the fluid grace of apex predator, her torn dress and scattered hair somehow making her more terrifying rather than less. The children remained under their table, trusting in her promise to protect them while having no concept of what that protection would require. The silent death was about to remind the world why that nickname had become legend, why enemies spoke it in whispers, why intelligence agencies had classified her existence beyond official acknowledgement. But this time, she fought not for governments or missions, but for 7 children who called her Miss Chen and believed she could handle any problem. This time, maternal fury would guide professional lethality toward a demonstration of protective love that would echo through both her students' lives and their enemies' nightmares. Sarah reached for the door handle, her other hand steady on the weapon that would either save innocence or die trying. The Good Samaritan lesson was about to become terrifyingly literal. Class was still in session. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.